Heather Mack is the daughter of late jazz musician and composer James L. Mack and socialite Sheila von Weiss Mack. She had a volatile relationship with her mother, resulting in nearly 90 police responses to the family's home in Oak Park, Illinois, between 2004 and mid-2013. Sheila accused Heather of physically abusing her, threatening her and stealing money from her on multiple occasions. Tensions between the women worsened after Heather began dating an unemployed rapper named Tommy Schaefer in 2014. Her mother disapproved of the relationship and even moved the family to keep Heather away from Schaefer, but the two continued seeing each other against Sheila's wishes. Sheila was afraid of Heather, but longed for a relationship with her 18-year-old daughter. Hoping to reconnect, she took Heather on a luxury trip to Bali in August of 2014. It was supposed to be a strictly mother-daughter vacation, but after they arrived, Heather used Sheila's credit card to buy Schaefer a $12,000 business class plane ticket to join them at the 5-star resort where they were staying. Several hours after Schaefer arrived, a hotel security camera captured footage of him arguing with Sheila in the lobby. Later that night, Schaefer and Heather placed a suitcase into the trunk of a taxicab and left the hotel by other means. They failed to return, and Sheila's murdered body was found inside the suitcase. She had been beaten and bludgeoned to death. Police tracked the fleeing couple to a nearby motel and arrested them on suspicion of murder. Heather and Schaefer claimed that Sheila had been killed by robbers and that they had managed to escape, but authorities didn't buy their story. Schaefer eventually admitted to killing Sheila, and text messages showed that he and Heather had planned the murder in advance in an attempt to collect the wayward teen's inheritance. During his trial in Indonesia, Schaefer claimed that he killed Sheila in self-defense after she found out that Heather was pregnant and attacked him. He pleaded guilty to murder and received an 18-year prison sentence while Heather took her case to trial. In April 2015, about a month after giving birth to her daughter behind bars, Heather was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years. She was released after 7 years due to good behavior and was deported to the US, where federal agents were waiting to arrest her on multiple charges related to her mother's death. Heather made it clear that she believed she had served her time and that she didn't deserve to be prosecuted on American soil. She ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiring to kill a US national and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Schaefer is still serving time in Indonesia and will face the same charges upon his return to the US. Number 15. Suzane von Richthofen. In a horrifying act of violence masterminded by their own daughter, Manfred Albert and Maricia von Richthofen were murdered on Halloween night in 2002 while they slept in their bed at their mansion outside Sao Paulo. 18-year-old Suzane von Richthofen waited on a sofa downstairs while her unemployed boyfriend, Daniel Cravenios, and his brother Christian bludgeoned the couple to death. During her teen years, Suzane had become increasingly entitled and demanding. She tried persuading her father to buy an apartment for her and Daniel to live in together, but her parents disapproved of the relationship and refused to support it in any way. Suzane had no money of her own but was set to inherit millions upon her parents' deaths. Determined to get her hands on her trust fund, she decided to hasten her mother and father's demise. After killing the victims, Suzane and her accomplices tried staging the scene to look like a burglary gone wrong. The young woman returned to the house hours later and pretended to discover her parents' bodies, feigning shock and devastation. Suspicions of her involvement grew in the days following Manfred and Maricia's deaths, when people noticed that Suzane appeared to be living a happy and carefree lifestyle. Unaffected by the tragic double slaying, she and the Cravenios had also started making suspiciously large purchases within hours of the murders, and police could not find an explanation for how an intruder would have bypassed the home's security system without Suzane's help. Suzane and the Cravenios brothers were ultimately convicted of their roles in the crime and sentenced to nearly 40 years in prison. During her time behind bars, Suzane married fellow inmate Sandra Regina, who was serving a 27-year sentence for kidnapping and murder. She became eligible for parole in 2014 but turned down the hearing in order to stay in prison with her wife. The couple divorced following Regina's release, and Suzane was paroled in 2023. Number 14. Brittany Simpson. During the spring of 2017, 31-year-old Brittany Simpson's family took legal action to evict her from their waterfront mansion in Charleston, South Carolina. She had stopped contributing toward the household's utility bills while living rent-free at the home, and her parents wanted her out of the house. Just days after the court granted the eviction order, Brittany entered her parents' bedroom at 6 in the morning and fatally shot her father, 66-year-old Robert Simpson, with a 9mm handgun, while the rest of her household slept. She then went outside and tossed her clothes and the murder weapon into a creek behind the house. As Brittany's family awoke to the commotion, she claimed that an intruder had killed Robert. Her sister frantically dialed 911 and begged police to hurry to the scene, even though it was unfortunately too late to save Robert's life. Investigators quickly noticed that Brittany's story didn't add up. They were also aware that the family had dealt with the young woman's escalating mental health crisis in the years leading up to the shooting, causing them to question whether Brittany had gone off the deep end and murdered her father. Police reports showed that the Simpsons had called for help in the past due to Brittany's manic episodes, and she had been committed to a psychiatric emergency room on at least 3 prior occasions. Divers found the gun and clothing in the water behind the house, and Brittany was charged with murder and possession of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. She was detained without bail at the Charleston County Jail, where other inmates accuse her of receiving special treatment. In a letter to local station Live 5 News, one woman claimed that Brittany had access to shoes, socks, and earplugs that other prisoners were not allowed to have. She was also reportedly allowed to use a personal phone to make certain calls to avoid having her conversations recorded, and she even had a laptop, which her defense attorney claimed was for the specific purpose of viewing evidence related to her case. Brittany ultimately took a plea deal and admitted to a reduced voluntary manslaughter charge in order to avoid putting her family through a trial after she had already forced them to suffer through Robert's death. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison with credit for time served, and is required to serve 85% of her term before becoming eligible for parole, which means she could see freedom again after serving as little as 13 years. Under the terms of her plea agreement, she'll be required to take a mental health evaluation and undergo any treatment deemed necessary. Number 13. Blake Leibel. Ayanna Kasayan's mother, Olga, knew something was terribly wrong when her 30-year-old daughter suddenly fell out of touch without warning in May of 2016. It was completely out of character for Ayanna to drop off the radar, especially since she had given birth to a daughter just weeks earlier. Police paid a visit to the West Hollywood home that Ayanna shared with her live-in fiancé, 35-year-old Canadian real estate heir, Blake Leibel. They received no response when they knocked on the front door, prompting officers to force their way into the apartment. There was a mattress barricading the door, and the cops found Leibel hiding in the master bedroom behind another barricaded door. He refused to come out, claiming that Ayanna was at the hospital. When the police finally made their way into the bedroom, they found Ayanna's decomposing corpse in a scene that was horrifying beyond words. She had been scalped and drained of half the blood in her body. Multiple news sources described it as the most gruesome murder in the history of Hollywood and perhaps in all of Los Angeles. Prior to meeting Ayanna and becoming a father, Leibel had moved to the area with dreams of making it big as a graphic novelist and a film director. Unlike many aspiring artists who struggle to make ends meet, he had a generous trust fund to live off courtesy of his parents, Toronto real estate mogul Lorne Leibel and manufacturing heiress Eleanor Chittle Leibel. Leibel's motive for murdering the mother of his child remains a mystery to this day, but the circumstances suggest that he may have been jealous of he and Ayana's newborn for the amount of attention she was receiving. He was no longer number one in Ayana's life, and he may have felt like the baby was interfering with his ability to control Ayana. It's also been speculated that Leibel was obsessed with gore and was trying to act out a fantasy depicted in the storyline of one of his graphic novels. Regardless of the reasons, the jury concluded that he was guilty and convicted him of first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Number 12. Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Söring. Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Söring enjoyed privileged upbringings as the daughter of a Canadian steel executive and the son of a German diplomat. They met at the University of Virginia during the 1980s and were brought together by their wealth, social awkwardness, and arrogance toward Americans. The young couple also bonded over their dysfunctional family lives, which included Elizabeth's strict and allegedly abusive parents, Derek and Nancy Haysom. It was no secret that the Haysoms despised their daughter's boyfriend, which only aggravated the existing tensions between Elizabeth and her parents. In April of 1985, Derek and Nancy were found stabbed to death in their Lynchburg, Virginia home. Nothing was missing from the home, ruling out the likelihood of a robbery gone wrong, and they were attacked with such rage that they were nearly decapitated, leading to suspicions that the murder was personal. Elizabeth provided unusual and inconsistent stories to the police, making her a prime person of interest in the horrific double homicide. Based on the things she was saying, it seemed like she was trying to deflect attention away from herself while demonizing her dead parents. Shortly after the murders, Elizabeth and Jens went on the run. They were captured in England, where they were living under aliases, and Jens admitted to the murders only to later recant his confession. He tried to claim diplomatic immunity, which the court determined he was not entitled to in this particular case. Further investigation revealed that Elizabeth had rented a hotel room in Washington, D.C. and a car on the night of the crime, leading to the theory that she stayed behind at the room while Jens drove the car to her parents' house and killed them. 2 years after the deaths of Derek and Nancy, Elizabeth pleaded guilty to 2 counts of accessory to murder and was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Jens has maintained his innocence ever since retracting his confession, but he was nevertheless convicted of murder and received 2 life sentences in the years since. He and Elizabeth have continuously pointed the finger at one another, even after being paroled in 2022 after each serving 33 years behind bars. Elizabeth was deported to Canada following her release, while Jens returned to Germany, and they're both banned from ever stepping foot in the United States again. Number 11. Sparkle Soojian and Yared Kasayewicz. In September of 2015, a self-proclaimed Armenian cracker heiress and 2 other suspects were charged in connection with the death of 31-year-old music producer John Michael King Smith, who was beaten and choked to death inside a Glendale apartment. 32-year-old Sparkle Soojian and her fiancé, 28-year-old U.S. Marine Yared Kasayewicz, were accused of murdering King Smith, while 25-year-old aspiring pop singer Courtney Argue was charged with 1 felony count of accessory after the fact. King Smith was Soojian's former roommate's ex-boyfriend. He was found clinging to life inside Soojian's residence by police, who responded to a reported disturbance at the scene shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning and subsequently died from his injuries. The medical examiner who performed his autopsy ruled that he had been asphyxiated in a fatal chokehold. According to news reports, Soojian had sent text messages to her friends stating that her stalker had shown up at the property. She was referring to King Smith, who she claimed had broken into her home and allegedly asked at least one person to kill the victim. Kazajewicz showed up at the apartment during the ordeal and reportedly found King Smith banging on Soojian's door. All three defendants initially pleaded not guilty to the charges they faced. Soojian pleaded guilty to a reduced involuntary manslaughter charge and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Kazajewicz pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and also received a 3-year prison sentence. Number 10. Joshua Molnar. In a case that left members of the public absolutely horrified, a teenager named Yusuf Mackey was brutally stabbed to death in Manchester, England, by his wealthy friend Joshua Molnar in 2019. Heartbreaking police body cam footage showed the victim during his final moments as he lay dying on the pavement. Molnar lied to police while pretending to cry, claiming that Mackey had been knifed in the heart by a group of black guys. He later admitted to being responsible for the stabbing, but was ultimately acquitted of both murder and manslaughter after claiming that he killed his friend in self-defense during an argument over a botched drug deal, and that he lied to the police about his role in Mackey's death because he panicked. In 2021, a coroner admitted to being unsure of the circumstances surrounding Mackey's death, but ruled out an unlawful or accidental killing. The following year, the controversial case was featured in a Channel 4 documentary called Killed by a Rich Kid. It garnered shocked responses from social media commenters who believe that Molnar got away with murder, with many citing the incident as a disturbing example of white privilege. In October of 2023, a coroner's inquest reviewed the case and reclassified Mackey's death as an unlawful killing. Following the decision, authorities said that more investigation was needed before deciding whether to retry the case. For now, Molnar remains free and is considered innocent. Number 9. Brennan Doyle. Donna Ong-Siako opened the front door of her Colts Neck, New Jersey home to let her cat inside one night in July of 2013 and came face to face with a knife-wielding teenager. The intruder began cutting through Ong-Siako's screen door as she tried to shut her inner door and slashed the terrified homeowner's finger with the blade, causing her to let go of the door handle. Later identified as a local high schooler named Brendan Doyle, he stabbed Ong-Siako repeatedly without saying a word. Doyle finally spoke after he stopped plunging the blade into the victim's body, asking her for her car keys and a lighter. Ong-Siako told him that the items were on her kitchen table, hoping he would just take them and leave. Before fleeing the scene in her stolen car, however, Doyle approached the severely injured woman as she lay bleeding on the floor and stabbed her in the chest one final time while calling her a derogatory name. Ong-Siako lived on a flower farm, too far from her neighbors for anyone to hear her screaming for help, and her phone was upstairs. Motivated by the thought of surviving for her daughter, she fought with all her strength to reach the second floor and managed to dial 911 before falling unconscious. Thankfully, emergency responders got to the scene in time to save Ong-Siako's life. Acting on a tip in the weeks following the attack, police paid Doyle a visit and noticed that he seemed nervous. He had also changed his appearance by cutting his hair, but authorities lacked enough evidence to charge him with the nearly fatal attack. A break finally came 3 months after the assault, when employees of a bowling alley where Ong-Siako's abandoned car had been found discovered a knife on the building's roof. It resembled a similar knife that had been seized from Doyle's home during a search and contained his DNA, leading to his arrest on 6 charges including attempted murder and carjacking. He pleaded not guilty and was released on bail. During his trial, Doyle blamed his violent behavior on psychedelic mushrooms, claiming that he lost touch with reality and became paranoid. Number 8. Stephanie Olsen. 41-year-old Diane Snellen was a hard-working single mum who always put her children first. She was especially close with her teenage daughter, Stephanie Olsen, who earned good grades and even graduated from high school a year early. But their relationship hit a snag in 2002 when Olsen asked Snellen if her boyfriend, David Dressman, could move into their Georgetown, Kentucky home. Snellen said no, and she also refused to allow Olsen to move in with Dressman. A blowout ensued between the mother and daughter, and Olsen ran off with Dressman. Despite Snellen's disapproval, Snellen reported her daughter missing, and because Olsen was not legally an adult, the police made her return home. She was just months away from turning 18, at which point her mother would no longer have any control over her life, but she was unwilling to wait that long to live together with Dressman. The couple commissioned the help of Timothy Crabtree, a rumored serial killer who agreed to help kill Snellen in exchange for a cut of the $200,000 life insurance payout Olsen expected to receive. In June of 2002, Snellen was stabbed to death inside her home. Police believe Olsen confronted her mother and that Dressman carried out the murder while Crabtree acted as a lookout. Crabtree entered an Alford plea to a conspiracy charge, which meant that he maintained his innocence while admitting that the prosecution likely had a strong enough case to secure a conviction against him. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. A jury found Olsen guilty of complicity to commit murder, landing her behind bars for 25 years, while Dressman received a 20-year sentence for complicity to commit murder and first-degree burglary. Number 7. Luis Barrios. In June of 2024, an 18-year-old influencer named Luis Barrios was accused of wreaking havoc in the Florida Keys with antisocial behavior. The incident began when police were called to the Sunset Grill in Marathon, where Barrios and his friends were causing a disturbance by drunkenly yelling and swearing. By the time officers arrived, the unruly group had fled on the teen's yacht, and the manager had received a threatening message on his phone from a number believed to belong to Barrios. Law enforcement paid a visit to the suspect's family's home. No one was there, but neighbors were quick to mention that the young man's disruptive behavior was nothing new. One nearby resident reportedly said, "Daddy took the car away, so he stole the boat. Something's got to be done about that kid." The neighbor went on to describe Barrios' father as a decent guy who achieved success through hard work, but he called Barrios a spoiled brat, while another community member described him as a thorn in our side. One person speculated that the teen acts obnoxious for attention and that he tries to buy people's friendship because he's not very likable. According to law enforcement, around 20 neighbors have complained to the authorities about Barrios, who has been arrested multiple times in the past. The yacht arrived at the residence while police spoke with neighbors, but Barrios refused to get off the boat, telling the officers to call his dad. Meanwhile, onlookers gathered in the street to watch the cops handcuff him and take him into custody. Neighbors could be heard yelling at Barrios about how he created his own problems and how nobody cares about his social media content. Throughout the arrest, Barrios spat at the police, called them pigs, and bragged about how rich his family was. He posted footage of the incident on social media, where commenters echoed similar sentiments to his neighbors about him being spoiled and entitled. The out-of-control teen was charged with trespass, second-degree disorderly conduct, and attempting to elude a law enforcement officer. Barrios most recently posted on social media in July, indicating that he is no longer in custody. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 6. Antonio Boparan. Multi-millionaire British businessman Ranjit Singh Boparan owns one of the UK's most lucrative food supply companies. Nicknamed the Chicken King, he's known for keeping an extremely low profile and staying out of the public eye as much as possible. It's almost unheard of for Boparan to grant a media interview, and he very rarely releases public statements. His son, on the other hand, has drawn plenty of unwanted attention to the family over the years. Antonio Boparan first made major news headlines at the age of 19 in 2006, when he crashed head-on into another vehicle at 80 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone in Sutton Coldfield, West Midlands. A young girl named Ceres Edwards, who was riding in the other car with her parents, was left paralyzed, unable to breathe on her own, and in need of round-the-clock care for the rest of her life. In 2007, Boparan served 6 months of a 21-month sentence after being convicted of severely injuring Edwards, who passed away 9 years later in October of 2015. Doctors concluded that she had died from medical complications stemming directly from injuries she sustained in the car accident, and Boparan was accused of being responsible for her death. In 2019, he pleaded guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. While handing down a 4-year prison sentence, the judge accused the 32-year-old chicken heir of having an arrogant disregard for the safety of others, and admonished him for destroying multiple lives with his reckless behavior. Number 5. Talan Renner. Gilbert, Arizona, is home to a criminal gang called the Gilbert Goons, who have increasingly made news headlines in recent years for committing horrifically violent crimes throughout the area. During Halloween weekend in 2023, several of the group's members beat a young man named Preston Lord to death at a party in Queen Creek. 7 Gilbert Goons have been charged in connection with Lord's murder, including Talan Renner, the teenage son of millionaire parents who allegedly tried to cover their son's tracks. A witness told police that Renner admitted to throwing the first punch in a fight with Lord over a $10 necklace. He and his co-defendants are all facing charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. In early 2024, Talan's father's ex-girlfriend told the media and the police about his parents' alleged attempts to cover up his role in Lord's murder. Talan's mother and father, Becky and Travis Renner, reportedly consulted with a criminal defense attorney after the incident and were told that their son would get off the hook due to the amount of people involved in the deadly assault. Travis Renner then drove Talan to the family's $850,000 cabin in Show Low, located roughly 3 hours away from where the crime occurred. According to Travis's ex-girlfriend, the lawyer advised the family not to bring Talan back to Gilbert until his hands healed from some injuries sustained during the attack on Lord. The teen otherwise carried on with his normal life despite being under investigation, and even continued to play football, but the evidence eventually caught up with him, including surveillance footage which showed him bragging about getting away with Lord's murder. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 4. Tyler Hadley. 17-year-old Tyler Hadley's peers were surprised when he threw a huge party at his parents' home in Port St. Lucie, Florida, in July of 2011. In addition to being a loner, he had recently complained about how strict his father and mother, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, were becoming. Tyler claimed his parents were out of town, and it wasn't long before 60 people showed up and started drinking and using drugs. Soon enough, guests began trashing the Hadleys' home. As more visitors showed up, people kept asking Tyler about where his parents were. He gave a few different stories, leading to half-hearted jokes about how he had probably killed Blake and Mary Jo, but nobody seriously thought that he had murdered his parents. And the inconsistencies in his stories were easy to overlook since he was high on ecstasy at the time. Just weeks earlier, Tyler had told a friend that he wanted to kill his parents, but he was known for saying things that were strange and out of line, so his friend didn't take him seriously. As the party wore on, however, Tyler began telling people that he had done something bad and that he was going to go away for a long time. He eventually pulled a friend aside and confessed to murdering his parents, at which point the friend noticed that the Hadleys' vehicles were still in the driveway and experienced the sickening realization that Tyler might not be joking after all. Tyler led his friend into the master bedroom, which had remained locked all night, while going into deeper detail about how he had hidden his parents' cell phones so they couldn't call for help, and beaten them both to death with the claw end of a hammer. There was blood everywhere, and his parents' decomposing corpses were in the room. Tyler's friend stayed at the party for several more hours and even took a selfie with the murderous teen before leaving and reporting the murders to a crime hotline. Police arrested Tyler the next morning. In the months leading up to the gruesome double homicide, Tyler's partying and bad behavior had gotten so out of hand that he was placed on house arrest and involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital under Florida's Baker Act, which allows parents to mandate their children to involuntary psychiatric care. He grew to resent his parents for trying to enforce discipline, ultimately resulting in his decision to simply eliminate them from the picture by killing them. In 2014, a jury found Tyler guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in the state of Florida. Number 3. Tommy Gilbert Jr. As the son of a wealthy hedge fund boss, Thomas "Tommy" Gilbert Jr. grew up in the lap of luxury in Midtown Manhattan. He received a world-class college education at Princeton and was often seen mingling with members of the upper crust at high society events, but he much preferred partying to working and failed to pursue a career with his prestigious degree or his far-reaching social connections, much to the frustration of his parents. Gilbert's life changed dramatically in 2015 when his 70-year-old father decided it was time to finally yank the silver spoon out of his 30-year-old son's mouth. In an attempt to force Tommy to grow up, his parents stopped paying around $10,000 worth of his monthly bills and expenses that they had previously covered, including his $2,400 rent and his upscale gym membership. The elder Gilbert also slashed his son's weekly spending allowance from $800 to $300. Shortly after the sudden financial cutoff, Gilbert showed up unannounced at his mother and father's home one afternoon. He asked his mother to go out and fetch him something to eat, and she returned to find her husband dead on the floor with a single gunshot wound to the head. Gilbert tried to make it seem like he wasn't involved in the tragedy, but his mother knew instantly that her troubled son was responsible for Tommy Sr.'s death. In June of 2019, roughly 4.5 years after the killing, a jury rejected Gilbert's insanity defense and found him guilty of second-degree murder. He received the maximum sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Today's topic was requested by Michael Allen 3395 and Angie Carver 3999. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jennifer Pan. Jennifer Pan was born in Markham, Ontario in 1986 to ethnically Chinese parents who had fled Vietnam as refugees. Her mother and father, Bich Ha Pan and Hui Han Pan, worked extremely hard to give Jennifer and her brother a comfortable life filled with opportunities. The couple held their children to high standards when it came to academics and sports, and they banned their kids from dating out of fear that it would distract them from success. Jennifer typically earned B's and C's in school, but she forged better marks on her report cards to keep her parents off her case. She also pretended to attend college classes after her acceptance to university was rescinded due to her poor grades. Her parents initially had no idea that she was spending her days working at a cafe and teaching piano, but they eventually became suspicious and caught Jennifer in her lies by following her one day. They were shocked to discover that their daughter hadn't even finished high school. Jennifer's father, Han, wanted to kick her out of the house, but her mother, Bick, persuaded him to let her stay while she earned her diploma. The already strict Pans imposed even tighter rules on their adult daughter, only allowing her to leave the house for work and banning her from seeing her boyfriend, Daniel Chi Kwong Wong, who got tired of sneaking around and ended the relationship. Jennifer and Wong eventually got back in touch and hatched a plot to hire a hitman to kill the Pans. Believing that Jennifer stood to inherit $500,000, the couple budgeted $10,000 for the hit and made plans to move in together once her parents were dead. In November of 2010, the hired hitman, David Milvaganam, and 2 others entered the Pan household and demanded cash before shooting Bick and Han several times. Bick died from her injuries and Han survived. Jennifer, who was home at the time, dialed 911 and pretended to be a victim, claiming that the so-called intruders had tied her up and assaulted her. But there were holes in her story, and the evidence eventually led investigators to the truth. Jennifer Wan, Malva Ghanem, and one of his accomplices, Lenford Roy Crawford, were all found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. Malva Ghanem's other accomplice, Eric Sean Sniper Carty, received an 18-year sentence. In 2023, Jennifer and 3 of her co-conspirators appealed the case, arguing that the trial judge had incorrectly instructed the jury, but the original verdict and sentences were upheld and the convicted killers remain behind bars. If these privileged pricks weren't enough to get your blood boiling, then what happens when romantic envy is involved? After number 1, we've got 10 jealous partners who lost it, lined right up for those who haven't seen it yet. Number 1. John Tyson. 34-year-old John Tyson is the great-grandson of the Arkansas-based Tyson Meat Company's billionaire founder. In November of 2022, a young woman found him passed out in her bed at her home in Fayetteville. He was in his underwear and the rest of his clothes were in a pile on the floor. Police body cam footage showed Tyson refusing to wake up while officers tried rousing him by yelling that he wasn't in the right house. One of the cops threatened to drag him out of the residence without clothes on, but he continued refusing to comply with orders and was taken to jail. Tyson was charged with intoxication and criminal trespass. He initially pleaded not guilty, but had an apparent change of heart a few months later and admitted to the charges. The incident happened just 2 months after Tyson was declared the CFO of his family's namesake company. When news of his criminal case broke, the company was quick to throw its support behind him, with its top-ranking officials saying that they still believed Tyson was capable of doing his job, but they changed their mind in June of 2024 after Tyson was arrested for driving while intoxicated and careless driving. A University of Arkansas police officer pulled him over after they saw his SUV making an illegal U-turn and swerving over a curb and onto the grass. According to a police report, the cop noticed several possible signs of intoxication, including bloodshot eyes and an odor of alcohol. Tyson was immediately suspended from his family's company. Following his arrest, he's slated to go to trial for the charges in August of 2024. Since his arrest, Tyson Foods CEO John Randall Tyson has remained silent about whether the disgraced heir will return to the company, leaving the future of his career uncertain.
An argument ensued, and at some point the defendant shot the victim multiple times. He's going to be held no bond. The court finds probable cause for the murder in second degree with a weapon.
42-year-old Stephen Meyers murdered his 21-year-old niece-in-law, Winnie Mendoza, at her Florida residence on July the 29th of 2019 after a secret 2-year affair. On the night of the attack, Meyers had allegedly followed the young woman home and after parking in her driveway, angrily demanded to know where she'd been. The argument escalated and the man eventually pulled out a gun, which he used to shoot Mendoza multiple times, killing her instantly. Meyers fled the scene and returned home, where he confessed to the murder to his wife, 34-year-old Luisa Amanda Mendoza, the victim's aunt. He turned himself into the authorities later that same evening and willingly gave the police a full statement in which he admitted to shooting Mendoza. Meyers indicated that he'd suspected his lover of seeing another man and murdered her out of sheer jealousy. He was held in custody without bail on a charge of second-degree murder. Number 9. Yunieski Carey Herrera. On November the 17th of 2020, Brazilian dancer Igor Ara de Souza murdered his partner, 39-year-old Yunieski Carey Herrera, at their Miami condo. Carey Herrera, also known by the stage name Uni Carey, was the 36th transgender woman to be murdered in the United States during the year 2020. Ara de Souza, aged 27 at the time, had gotten a tattoo of Carey Herrera's name on his hip only a month before the murder. While under the influence of illicit substances, Arrow de Souza got into a heated argument with his partner, and after being told she'd found a better man, grabbed a knife and fork from the kitchen and stabbed her to death. Arrow de Souza called 911 and immediately confessed to the jealousy-fueled killing, telling officers he'd ruined his life and deserved to be punished. He was arrested and held without bond on a charge of second-degree murder. A trial hearing was scheduled to take place in early 2023. Number 8. Lindsay Erin Collins. Lindsay Erin Collins, age 25, was shot by a sheriff's deputy in Kissimmee, Florida, after breaking into her ex-boyfriend's apartment and threatening both him and his roommate with a knife on September the 26th of 2018. She'd reportedly sent her former partner, 36-year-old Christopher Ingram, several threatening texts on the night prior to the attack, accusing him of dating another woman and stating, "I will hunt you all down. I will kill her, take her life and mine. You can watch. I don't care." After a brief altercation with the young woman, Ingram and his roommate, Kenneth Musselman, managed to flee the house and call 911. Deputy Lance Turley arrived at the scene a short time later and started to interview the victims, at which point Collins began running towards them holding a knife threateningly. Turley shot at the suspect, hitting her in the chest. Emergency services were immediately called to the house, and Collins was rushed to the hospital. After being stabilized, she was charged with 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, armed burglary, criminal mischief, and aggravated assault. Turley was suspended from the force with pay pending an internal investigation into the shooting. Number 7. Jennifer Sessler. 46-year-old Jennifer Sessler was accused of destroying her ex-boyfriend's car in a fit of jealousy on August the 10th of 2022 in Coral Springs, Florida. Both of the vehicle's taillights were busted, and the paint was severely scratched with the word "whore" etched on the side. The victim, whose real name wasn't released to the media, reported the incident to the authorities, stating that he suspected Sessler to have been behind the vandalism. The two of them had recently broken up after dating for 3 years. Sessler had reacted angrily to a picture the victim had posted on his Facebook page with a new girlfriend. When police interviewed the suspect, she denied the accusation, claiming she'd been in Tallahassee at the time of the incident. However, she was arrested after detectives discovered surveillance footage that placed her at the scene of the crime, and she consequently faced a charge of criminal mischief. Number 6. Audrey Stevenson. Scottish woman Audrey Stevenson attacked her friend, Veronica Bannon, during her wedding reception in Linlithgow on July the 28th of 2017. The bride accused Bannon of flirting with her new husband, Scott Allen. Following a brief argument, 46-year-old Stevenson grabbed Bannon's hair and smashed her head into a door, knocking out 2 of her teeth. The couple were arrested at the scene and consequently missed their flight to Mexico, where they'd planned to spend their honeymoon. 55-year-old Allen denied any involvement in the attack, telling authorities he'd been surprised by his wife's actions. He was released after the prosecution accepted his not guilty plea. Although Stevenson initially claimed that she hadn't assaulted Bannon, she eventually agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. She was fined $450 and ordered to pay an additional compensation of $400 to cover the victim's cosmetic procedures. Number 5. Tosha Strahan. Tosha Strahan, a resident of Torrington, Connecticut, stabbed her live-in boyfriend David Vasquez to death on February the 9th of 2014. 25-year-old Vasquez had attempted to break up with Strahan, informing her that he was planning to get back with an ex. An autopsy revealed that the victim died from a stab wound to the heart which punctured his aorta. Detectives discovered text messages Vasquez had exchanged with his ex-girlfriend in which he told the unnamed woman that he was scared of breaking up with Strahan. She had allegedly threatened to murder him and harm herself if he ended their relationship. Strahan, who was 24 at the time, called 911 after the attack, claiming to have accidentally injured her boyfriend. When police arrived at the scene, they found the young woman attempting to perform CPR on Vasquez. Detectives interviewed several witnesses who'd been at the residence at the time of the murder. According to testimony collected by officers, Strahan had told Vasquez, "If I can't have you, no one can," prior to attacking him. Although the general consensus among witnesses was that the stabbing had been intentional, Inconsistencies in their statements delayed Strahan's arrest. In 2018, she pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years behind bars, followed by 5 years probation. Number 4. Fatima Fardous. British woman Fatima Fardous of Bradford, West Yorkshire, violently attacked her boyfriend, Mirza Raza, in April of 2016 after suspecting him of being unfaithful. 29-year-old Fardous had become enraged after noticing that Raza had gotten a shave and a haircut. She reportedly believed the grooming to be proof that he was seeing another woman. She called him repeatedly throughout the day in question, leaving threatening messages and even trashed his apartment while he was at work. The couple began arguing upon Raza's return home. At one point, Fardous lunged at her boyfriend, aiming a kitchen knife in the direction of his chest. Raza stepped aside and the knife instead landed in his arm with such force that the handle broke off. Fardous attempted to grab a second knife, but the victim managed to flee the scene and contact the authorities before the violence could continue. Fardous was arrested but denied each of the charges levied against her. Much to her surprise, Raza supported her claims of innocence while testifying, stating that the stabbing had been an accident. Fardous was ultimately found guilty anyway and was consequently sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Number 3. Gabrielle Nunez. 21-year-old Florida resident Gabrielle Nunez lashed out in violence against the father of her child after answering a phone call from his girlfriend in July of 2019. The man, who hasn't been named, had reportedly been intimate with Nunez earlier on the evening in question and had fallen asleep next to her in bed. When the victim's phone rang, Nunez answered it and was confronted by his girlfriend, who asked what she was doing in his apartment. Nunez woke the man up and began arguing with him as she placed their child in a stroller. She then grabbed a knife and lunged at him. He retreated into the bathroom and locked himself inside while Nunez repeatedly stabbed the door and shouted at him from the other side. She eventually managed to gain access to the bathroom but was disarmed by the victim and restrained on the floor until police arrived at the scene. She was arrested and charged with attempted murder and aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Number 2. James Michael Watson. On October the 30th of 2017, James Michael Watson viciously beat up his girlfriend's dog named Brooklyn in Salisbury, Maryland. Having grown jealous of the attention it received from her, Brooklyn, a bulldog, suffered injuries to her left eye, nose, and the top of her head, but fortunately survived the attack. The dog was treated at Healing Hands Animal Hospital, while Watson was arrested by officers who responded to the scene. He was charged with 2 counts of animal cruelty as well as malicious destruction of property. In October of 2021, Watson was convicted of his charges and consequently sentenced to the Department of Correction for a term of 1 year and 1 day. Number 1. Armando Barron. On September the 19th of 2020, 32-year-old Armando Barron lured his wife's lover, Jonathan Amaro, into a lethal trap after discovering evidence of their affair. Barron caught his partner, 33-year-old Brittany, exchanging flirtatious texts with the victim, who was aged 25 at the time. He subsequently posed as his wife and arranged to meet Amaro at Wayside State Park in Rindge, New Hampshire. Upon Amaro's arrival, Barron forced him into a car before gunning him down. The autopsy report revealed the presence of defensive wounds on the victim's arms and hands, indicating there was some sort of physical struggle in the moments before the shooting. According to Brittany's testimony, Barron violently beat her and forced her to drive over 190 miles to a remote campsite, while he followed behind in another vehicle. When they got to their destination, he allegedly pressured Brittany into beheading her lover's corpse and disposing of the body. Fish and Game officers discovered the remains several days later. Brittany agreed to testify against her husband and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of falsifying evidence. Barron was ultimately found guilty of 13 counts, including criminal solicitation for murder and assault, kidnapping, and first-degree murder. Presiding Judge Elizabeth Leonard sentenced the culprit to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 to 135 years. Thanks for watching. If you could be reborn as someone else's kid, who would you pick to be your parents and why? Let us know in the comments section below.